Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our discussion on a circular and sustainable food system in Ireland. I'm Catherine Fulvio, and I run Ballyknocken House and Cookery School in County Wicklow, and I have a particular interest in food waste, not just the food waste from the saucepan, not just the food waste from the fridge, but what happens to the food before it even comes into our home, and what happens after it leaves our home. Food waste is far-reaching. It's not just the visual, immediate waste we see in our homes, but it's also the waste of energy and resources used to produce this food in the first place, which all forms part of a sustainable ecosystem. So today we are discussing in more detail a circular and sustainable approach to food waste. Now, before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, we're recording this, which I hope is okay with you. Secondly, I'm sure this is not your first Zoom rodeo, but if you could keep your microphones off, please, that would be marvelous. And the other thing is we very much welcome questions. There's a chat box below. Please pop your questions in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on it. We'll have our discussion, and after that, we'll move on to the chat. Now, from a variety of fields, we have amazing experts who are going to teach us a lot more and inspire us about this critical topic. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Colum Gibson, Environmental Consultant, Clean Technology Centre, Dr. Sinead McCarthy, Research Officer in Teagasc, Dr. Jenny Attard, Research Project Manager in CircBio Research Group, Odile Bolloch, Environmental Scientist in the EPA, Dr. Sushanta Kumar Saha, Microalgal Biotechnologist in ShannonABC, and Courtney Sheehy, Manager, FoodShare, Kerry. Before I kick off with any questions, I'd love for our panelists to spend a few minutes introducing themselves and telling us about what they do and their area of expertise. So let's kick off with Colum.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Colum Gibson. I'm the manager of the Clean Technology Centre, which is an environmental not-for-profit research agency in MTU, or formerly CIT. We've been working on sustainability since the early 90s, but my journey on food waste, I suppose, started around 2008, 2009, after we had been involved in the characterization studies, which are carried out every number of years by the EPA. And I think anybody who's had close encounters with large volumes of food waste can't help but be pretty moved by the experience. So after the results of those studies came out, I think it was at a time when the appreciation of food waste nationally and globally was beginning to rise. And the EPA then initiated the Stop Food Waste program, which we were involved in for a decade. But there were other projects that came out of that sort of prime research work. Food Cloud was established, started being established in 2011. The Green Healthcare Programme, which had a strong focus on food waste, began at that time. And we worked through local authorities throughout the country on community and household food waste initiatives. More recently, we've been involved in research work looking at the causes, the types and the sources of food waste in the commercial sector, primarily in food service and food retail. We initiated with Department of Agriculture funding the Safer Food Programme, which is a community-based approach to food waste for food services. And we're currently working with Odile and her team on developing a national standard for measuring food waste in a consistent and usable manner for businesses. So yeah, over the years, it's been a long journey. I think one of the key things really is that food waste research and interventions are still relatively young comparing to other other disciplines such as healthcare. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Colum. And Sinead?
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Sinead McCarthy, and I'm a research officer at the Teagasc Food Research Centre in Ashtown in Dublin. And my area of research interest is consumer behaviour in relation to food, health and sustainability, and trying to combine all of these measures into one research topic. When it comes to food waste, then, although we're not eating our waste, we're still disposing of a significant amount of our food that's rich in many nutrients. And And we also have to face the global challenge of feeding a growing population in the future. So it's crucial that we start to address our food waste patterns and our food waste behaviours to try and reduce these. So some of the recent research that I've been looking at has been part of a European funded circular agronomics project. And within this project, we're trying to expand on that concept of the circular economy from an agricultural and consumer perspective. And within the consumers then looking to see what do we need to do to change behaviours so that we can reduce our food waste. And our initial research is starting to show that social norms play a very big part in this. So if it becomes unacceptable to waste our food, we're less likely to waste it. So we need to have examples around us of people not wasting food, if you like, and that we adopt those particular behaviours then as well. So that's where my interest is at the moment.
That's very interesting, Sinead. It's almost like littering, or that it becomes such a bad thing to do that people would balk at even considering it.
Yeah, and just placing the value on food that it does have, that it is a precious commodity. It requires a significant amount of resources to make it that we don't get back if we don't consume the food. And so when you were introducing yourself earlier and talking about the perspectives that you're interested in, from my perspective, it's at the kitchen table or what comes in our shopping, because apparently we throw out about a third of our shopping every week.
I'd well believe it. Thank you for that, Sinead. And Jenny?
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jenny Attard. I'm a research project manager with the Circular Bioeconomy Research Group and down in MTU Kerry. So that used to be IT Tralee, and now we've joined with CIT to become Munster Technological University. So the Circular Bioeconomy Research Group has been around for probably about 2 years or just over that now. And we look at, of course, the bioeconomy, so many research projects that have to do with that, looking at biorefineries of the marine sector, agriculture, and of course, my area would be food waste particularly. So some of the research I would have been involved in, particularly last year, would have been the Efficient Food Project. So that was funded by the EPA, and Odile was involved in that as well. So that was a collaboration with UCD, where we looked at mapping out food losses and waste from primary production in Ireland. So that's the first stage, I suppose, of food production. So that's agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries. So we would have quantified all of that, interviewed farmers and growers, and looked at all the reasons for why food waste is happening. And what we found is that a lot of the major issues in Ireland particularly are in the horticulture sector, so with vegetables particularly. And I suppose one of the things that we looked at to do, or one of the solutions that we came up with for that, was that, you know, a lot of that food was edible and it could be donated. So, and I assume Courtney will speak a little bit more about this as well, but we're also doing a project with Food Cloud at the moment, trying to kind of cover the costs of farmers to harvest this food and then pass it on to Food Cloud so that they can redistribute this to people who are suffering with food poverty. And then another solution, and I guess one of the things I'm working on at the moment most, is the AgroBridges project. So that's shortening food supply chains. So trying to reconnect kind of producers with consumers so that the power is put back into the hands of the producers, I guess, and a lot of the consumers can learn about food production. And like Sinead was saying as well, you know, relearn the value of food, I guess.
And Jenny, did you find during your research that in the recent year and a half, because of the various lockdowns and that the food supply chain had shortened substantially, and that people were supporting local suppliers more? Or were people going and bulk buying in the supermarkets in a panic?
Yeah, we don't actually have those results yet, but that is something that we're looking into. So we did a consumer survey recently for that, and not specifically for COVID, but just trying to understand what the needs and barriers are for short food supply chains. So why consumers would choose to, what they value essentially, you know, why they would shop in a certain way, whether convenience is the issue and these kinds of things. But yeah, so if people can follow the AgroBridges project, you'll see that we should be releasing some results on those very soon.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan, obviously, of a short food supply chain. It's not just, I suppose I'm a daughter of, and a granddaughter and a great-granddaughter of a farming family. You know, it's just, shopping locally and buying locally, if possible, is so important, even just for our local communities, beyond food waste. So I'm a massive fan of that. So it's very interesting. Thank you for that, Jenny.
Thanks, Catherine.
Odile.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi everybody, I'm Odile Bolloch and I lead the food waste prevention team in the EPA. So the work we do in relation to food waste prevention is part of the circular economy program in the EPA, and food waste is a priority topic there. And I suppose, you know, there's a lot of policy background around why we work on food waste. Obviously, Colum mentioned sort of the evolution, but even, you know, Ireland signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, which looks to have food waste by 2030. And similarly, government policy has started to reiterate that type of target as well. So I suppose from our point of view, we have a really strong message that preventing food waste is the only way to reach that target. You know, there's lots of waste management options, but that's still waste that needs to be treated. And obviously moving food waste up the chain to better, you know, solutions is ideal, but prevention is we've got to stop generating the food waste in the first place. So the work we do we kind of have three strands. Colum mentioned our Stop Food Waste program. So that's aimed at householders and consumers. And I suppose over the last couple of years, we spent a lot of time gaining more behavioral insights. Before we were kind of working a lot on instinct, on what we thought people should do or didn't do and all of that. But some of our insights now are really informing our campaigns, and we're targeting them right down to the key people, you know, key audiences and behaviors that we would like to influence positive behaviors. A bit like Sinead said there, we want to create these social norms where people recognize these are the good behaviors rather than wagging fingers and telling people you shouldn't be doing that. So that's kind of the aim of Stop Food Waste, is to be a useful resource to help people learn how they can reduce their food waste. We then do work along the supply chain. So with the retail sector, we've done a lot of work on them measuring their food waste, and a lot of our work with the supply chain is going to be around measuring, because really, if you don't know what you're dealing with, no, you can't identify where the solutions are going to be. So part of that, we do have to report to the European Commission on food waste levels. So we do gather waste statistics that will help us gain that information, but we need to get a bit more granular in the different sectors and root down and dirty in bins. And, you know, studies that Jennifer has done and Colum have done in the past as well really help to give us a bit more insight into the types of food waste and help identify the reasons. And then we also do some work with the hospitality and food services sector. And obviously that is, you know, there's huge areas there for changing, you know, even communication, front of house communication with customers. And I suppose this is the thing, a lot of this is very difficult. It's behavior change, which doesn't happen overnight. So it is a bit of a slow burn, but for us, the focus is on gaining insights and data so that we know we're focused on the right things.
Thanks for that, Odile. And can I congratulate you on the wonderful website you have, Stop Food Waste. I have recommended so many guests from our cookery school go to it. There's for anybody watching today, there's so much information on what to do if you find yourself with that leftover pepper or with those extra few aubergines you bought. You'll find it highly inspirational. It also helps you with regards to purchasing in season as well, where the food is fresher and probably more local as well. So yeah, thank you for all of that, Odile. Now, Sushanta, I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say.
Thanks, Catherine, and good morning, everyone. So myself, Dr. Sushanta Kumar Saha, and I'm Bioeconomics is a microbiologist, and I have been working on microalgal biotechnology. And my experience with the food waste is not very old. It's just 1 year. 1 year we have started a very exciting project funded by Science Foundation Ireland under the program called Food Challenge Program, where I found the microalgae can play a significant role. And I think we all agree, and our panelist already mentioned about how the food waste can be a resource for not waste and actually regenerate the value that we can, and that is how our project is very important. So food waste is actually an inevitable process of the food production, because the global population, the way it's increasing, there will be certainly an increase in the food production. So that means there is a process of food waste, and that is starting from the farm to the fork. So the food waste is a value-added product. But as of now, I think Colum has also mentioned, we are just very young in tackling the food waste in a proper way to recycle and get the energy. Otherwise, to produce the food, the amount of energy that is invested, the land, the fertilizer, the labor and other costs is not recycled properly. For example, as of now, the compost is the best. We know that at the maximum we do the compost, but even the composting process, we are not able to recycle or capture some of the gases that is produced. For example, the CO2 is been released. So that is where our experience with the food waste program, with the WABA project, where we are looking into the circular bioeconomy solution, where actually we want to recycle the food waste for the production of food and also not wasting any of the energy. And in our system, we have a process. For example, it starts with anaerobic digestion, which looks maybe a fancy word for some general people, but it is otherwise. Even you leave a food outside in your backyard, it will be automatically digested and it goes to the soil. So mineralization is happening, but that process is aerobic process. But in our system, what is that is a closed tank for okay, consider this way. So it's a closed container where we'll be dumping all our food waste, because our aim is to use some of the special microbes in that closed container to produce the gases and produce the nutrients, which is otherwise going to be lost. And through our project, we can also recycle the energy and the nutrients, and ultimately this is going to be a plug and play system to tackle with the food waste. And our solution is actually looking for not just at the farmer scale, also at the industrial scale. For example, food waste are also produced in a food processing industry. So, and in a centralized system, this can be implemented. So this solution is for everybody. So yeah, I think that is how we are very excited to help with the food waste challenge and the microalgae. As I just briefly mentioned, which is my background, microalgae are nothing but the microscopic plants, and they are capable of growing and fixing CO2 10 times faster than the higher plants, and they are sustainably can be produced. And that is how our solution, we think, is very, very important. And we have successfully demonstrated in our seed phase, and we are looking for subsequent progress. So yeah, any further, I am available to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushanta. That's the WAVA project, isn't that right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and there'll be information on all the projects at the end. So we'll pop that up on a screen later, because you might want to look into that in more detail. Now we have Courtney, who's doing amazing things down in Kerry.
How are things? My name is Courtney Sheehy, and I've spent the last 10 odd years working in food and rights-based programs, both here and in a number of countries in Africa. And currently I work as the manager of FoodShare Kerry, which operates as Kerry's largest food bank. And I think my interest in the circular economy model stems more from a social perspective, and those statistics that we hear over and over again, but never cease to jar me, that in Ireland we waste over 1 million tons of food every single year, while at the very same time, 1 in 9 of us goes to bed hungry. The fact that the food sector is one of our largest economic sectors, but continuously subject employees who are for the most part female to low working pay, to worse working conditions, and the fact that food waste and hunger are inarguably linked, and the effects are often felt by the most vulnerable and disadvantaged in our society. I think in general our food system is fractured, and FoodShare Kerry was created in response to this fracture, and one of the main arms of our organisation is surplus food redistribution. So we take surplus food from local businesses and suppliers, we grade it, repackage it, and then deliver it to one of 30 groups based throughout the county, who then redistribute it to families that are food insecure. And in this way, we try and bridge the gap between food waste and food poverty. This year alone, we've rescued over 20 tons of surplus food, providing the equivalent of 50,000 meals to over 10,000 food insecure individuals in our county. And while that makes for a great annual report, we're super mindful that operating as a food bank is merely a band-aid for the deeper socioeconomic issues of food waste and food poverty. And it might seem slightly controversial, especially considering that surplus distribution sits so highly on our food waste hierarchy. However, in my opinion, it doesn't really fit into the circular economy. by concept, we should be designing out food waste streams rather than diverting them. And last year and this year, FoodShare Kerry have proved itself to be an essential service. So unfortunately, food banks aren't going anywhere. But I think if we're having a really honest conversation on circular economy and sustainability of this food system, as was mentioned before, we need to focus on prevention, that surplus redistribution is a stepping stone, but it should be the end goal.
Very, very interesting, Courtney. And I agree with you totally. It's wonderful, and it's amazing that you can look after so many people who are in food poverty. But you're right, that shouldn't be the system either. So you're so right. So we better kick off with some questions. So I have a particular, I'm the lay person here, by the way. So I'm asking questions that I would understand. So let us start with Colum. And may I ask you, Colum, in your opinion, what's the main solution that we should focus on for food waste in Ireland?
Thanks, Catherine. That's a pretty tricky question. Yeah, look, food is so multifaceted that you know, is there one solution? I don't think so. As I mentioned in the intro, you know, the research around food waste and food waste prevention is young. We're figuring it out. Odile mentioned that, you know, a lot of the work that was carried out through Stop Food Waste and the other programs I mentioned, it was kind of intuitive, and because of that, you know, there's very little sort of research reports based on, say, Stop Food Waste and other national programs that have been carried out internationally. But that's beginning to change. And I think the fields of psychology and sociology, even though I'm a scientist, so I find these things kind of hard to talk about, they are beginning to be considered with regard to food waste and its prevention. So what do I think? I think data and information are key, you know, the reason we need that is it's a kind of a precursor to change. You know, you can have a gut feeling about something, but until you have, you know, quantified information about the sources, the causes, you know, and the volumes of food waste, you can't set targets, and if you don't set targets, you can't, you know, appreciate whether you've improved or not. So I think data is hugely important. DPA have been doing an awful lot of work on this. And the data needs to be at a national level, so we can report to the targets we've signed up to, but also at a sort of more granular business-based level, so businesses can appreciate where they sit comparing to their peers. Because as Sinead mentioned, you know, social norms, while we often think of them in terms of householders, they're equally valid in terms of businesses. So data is very important. Where do you sit? And then I think we need advocates. I think we need to start having a very open and honest conversation. Courtney did mention the fact that, you know, food redistribution should be designed out effectively. You know, I'm involved in Food Cloud, and we've always said if we do our job properly, Food Cloud would be no more effectively, and similarly for FoodShare Kerry. So we have to have an honest conversation about it. I think the stakeholders nationally need to start talking, you know, because, you know, we work with a lot of restaurants and food service businesses, and while we have some chefs involved in our team, I think they need to hear from their peers. They need to hear from their representative organizations. I think there's a great responsibility on those people who have a voice in sectors to talk honestly about it, to keep flagging it, and to, you know, articulate the fact that, you know, there are loads of preventative options. We just need to get them out there and get them applied.
I suppose, Colum, in the hospitality industry, which is the area I work in, you've got a couple of different facets to it. One is the food that's left on the plate, which is, well, I won't say beyond the bounds of the chef, because we could do smaller portions, but the other is the actual food waste in the kitchen. And I've always believed, and this is what I'm going to ask you, that chefs were actually, because they're taught to watch their margins and taught to be very careful about how they reutilize so that the kitchen can make a profit, that the food waste coming directly from the kitchen wouldn't be as high as one might think. Is that what you have found, Colum, in your research, or have things changed because of our food production structure in commercial kitchens?
Well, very interesting question, Catherine. You know, I mentioned research we carried out a couple of years ago where we spent 2 years basically in the back of kitchens assessing food waste and intercepting it and finding out, you know, where is it coming from and what does it actually contain? Does it contain peelings, etc. And it varies. Canteens tend to have the highest level of food waste per sort of avoidable food waste, but they're the food waste that they're generating per cover or per person served is low. The reason being is that a lot of the food is pre-prepped coming in full service restaurants and hotels, where there's a different kind of food production principle being applied, where they're preparing from first principles. You obviously have more peelings, and Sushanta mentioned that earlier. The fact that there is the inevitable peelings. That said, there was a guy in CIT Culinary Arts, Seamus Ford, and he did a study one time with first year students about carrots to see how much carrot waste there was. And he had a competition between all his students, and they all tried to outdo each other. And he came in and he just washed the carrot. And he said, there you go, I beat you all. So, I understand the whole that part of it, that prep stuff. The unserved food, which is food that's prepped and never sold, is obviously, from a gross profit perspective, one that you have to look at. And then you have food waste coming back from plates. And I was having a chat with a guy in Watergrass Hill recently, and he runs a small restaurant, and he said, look, my thought on food waste is if it's coming back off a plate, then there's a problem, and the problem is somehow related to what we have prepared. And that's a very interesting perspective. Easy for him because he's involved from start to finish, in every aspect of cooking, serving, and bringing it back. In larger institutions where there's this break in the chain, a chef produces, somebody serves, somebody brings it back in, and somebody washes up, there may not be the connections. And that's why what we're doing with the EPA at the moment is trying to develop a very easy way for food service businesses to measure their food, to get a food waste number. What is your food waste number? Using existing data, because the food waste surveys, they take a lot of time, they take a lot of resources, and that's not something that most food service businesses have. So we're developing a methodology where they use their waste contractor data, and we use national stats to give them a food waste number, which they can then compare to others in their sector, and they can use to track their level of improvement, once they make changes. It's the plates. And that's where the value is, and that's where all the effort and time and money has gone into prep stuff. It's inevitable in some instances, but of course can be prevented as well.
Yeah, it's very in-depth, Colum, but it's very interesting when we get those figures for me as well. Jenny, may I ask you the same question? What's your main solution that we should focus on here in Ireland?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so I obviously completely agree with Colum as well, and I think that personally I would have worked on the lab as well, like Sushanta, and working on solutions for avoidable food waste, and we're always going to have unavoidable food waste, and even at the moment there's always going to be solutions, like Courtney saying, things that we need to do with the food waste that we have right now, so we're studying it, we're measuring it, we're coming up with all these solutions, but there still is food waste right now. So until we come up with a bigger solution, all of those things still need to be in place. But then in terms of the actual solutions themselves and trying to do something, and there's all these targets, I think that we still, while we're measuring and while we're doing all of this, there's still solutions that we know about, there's still problems that are very obvious that we can do something about now. And that's, and in my opinion, one of the bigger things there is the way the food supply chain is set up. I think it's far too long. People don't understand where their food comes from. A lot of people don't understand what it looks like when it's growing. Like even personally, for example, I wouldn't have known what a Brussels sprout looked like growing, a few months ago, and that's I think quite a common thing as well. And I just feel like if we were more connected to our producers, if we spoke to them at the farmers market every week, then we'd know kind of what was in season, we'd know the problems they'd have, and then maybe you'd know why the vegetables looked a little bit uglier, and then you'd still buy them because you knew they were grand. And all of these kinds of things. And then at the same time, the farmer would learn about the market himself. He'd know, instead of having his orders coming directly from a supermarket who would decide his prices and decide how much gets sold or cancel orders even sometimes and result in more food waste, I think the producer could learn, listen, this is what the consumers want. I know that locally, this is what my local people like to have to eat, and then he can plan based on that. And the education, I think, grows and grows, and it's just, I think it's a very kind of simple solution in a sense that, all you have to do is get the farmers to go there, but I don't think there is that drive for it. So even, for example, in the project that I'm working on, the agro bridges that I mentioned, we're coming up with a toolbox there, and that will help support producers in developing their business models, for example, showing them the different options for how they can sell their produce basically to and directly to consumers, or slightly indirectly, but through a shorter food supply chain. But at the same time, you know, farmers, growers are very, very busy people. So to ask them to go and change their business model completely, even if they wanted to, and if they thought it was a good idea, it might be something that's very difficult to do. So, you know, even some kind of drive, like having some kind of mentorship program, something like that, just to help them to do that and to connect us better. So that, again, the value, we can understand food again, and the value can go back into food, and, you know, we'll feel bad throwing food away. You know, if you're getting food from your neighbor, like if your neighbor grew the potatoes that you have in the kitchen, you're going to be like, no, I'm not going to throw those away. Like, you know, whereas if all they are to you is a few euros, you'll be like, oh, maybe whatever, like, you know. So I think, yeah, that's basically, that's what I think.
Is to understand really the value of food and the value of the food production. And when you can put a face to the producer, it means an awful lot more, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Odile, my next question is for you. Thank you for that, Jenny. What are the key actions that we need to do over the next 2 years to have the food waste by 2030? Because that's a big ask, because we already learned that up to a third of our food gets wasted.
Yeah, it is a big ask, and like that's 9 years away. It's not very long at all, especially given we are really only getting started. I think one of the really important things that we need to do is, it's quite a busy space. There's a lot of people now working in this area on food waste. We all need to pull in the same direction. At the moment, there are kind of people in silos working on different projects. Even some people here I hadn't encountered over the course of my work. So even this is really useful that we know about each other now. And one of the things I know that the government are working on at the moment is a roadmap on food waste. So that will identify some of the key stakeholders and bring together everything, you know, in one. I think one of the things for us is we are the National Food Waste Prevention Programme. So, you know, we've quite a key role in getting this to happen. So we definitely need to be linking in with all this other work that's going on. I think the really important thing is that everyone needs to be seen to be playing their part. You can't be pointing fingers at certain sectors. As you know, even Jenny mentioned there, it's all a consequence. You know, food wasted higher up the chain is due to, you know, maybe retail practices, which is in turn due to consumer requests, consumer demand. So everyone has to be seen to be playing a part. And then for us, you know, what's really important is the measurement aspect. I think we still don't actually know half of what, you know, we kind of have this million tons figure, which is the best number we can come up with at the moment. Data needs to improve in each of the sectors so that we do know a bit more about what our baseline is. And then I think also to help us 2030, while I am aware it's only 9 years away, it seems quite far away for most people. And so I think if an interim target maybe at that, you know, 2025, we have to be at a certain point. And in fact, our own food waste work has set a few interim targets that we will be aiming for, but I think as a country maybe, so that yet again that we're all pulling in the same direction. And then I think, you know, really important with that is as companies and businesses start to get better at measuring their food waste, we're getting more consistent data. And then we'll also identify, as Colum mentioned, these kind of benchmarks so companies can understand, actually, why are we wasting this much when it should only be this much? And that definitely is a driver for behavior change. And ultimately, prevention solutions are actually behavior change, and that's why we need a lot of this, you know, kind of input to help convince people, because everybody thinks somebody else is wasting food, not them. You talk to everybody and we only waste a small amount. It's really the retail sector, and like our data shows, it's not really the retail sector, you know. So but it's everyone, and I think that's, we all need to acknowledge, as Colum said, just show the dirty linen, say, look, this is what happens and these are the reasons why, which will help us start to identify the solutions. And I think then, you know, then there's a really important communication piece to all of this work. Like in tandem with all of that work, we do need to make sure that we continue to highlight positive behaviors to consumers, and that'll create a societal change. Then consumers will demand it in restaurants. They won't want big portions that they can't eat anymore. You know, they won't want the, you know, ample breakfast buffets in hotels, or, you know, because at the moment those businesses are telling us, look, if I reduce my portion size, my customers will think I'm mean. And, you know, so there's issues there. I think that once we continue to communicate the positive aspects and highlight the issues, why this is an issue. I think everybody thinks it's a simple solution and oh, we just need the retailers to do something, or we just need the farmers to do something. So I think, you know, there's measurement. We need to all pull in the same direction. We need to measure properly, and then we need to continue the communications to create that societal change. And you mentioned measurement, Odile. We measure through, I suppose, what goes into our brown bin, through the waste manufacturers. Is that the best way? And then obviously, like for example, here we have our own compost for the peelings and that. Yeah, well, the national statistics are gathered from the waste industry. So waste companies need a permit to collect waste, and they're obligated to report the tonnages that they collect. I think one of the things to be mindful is there's food waste in the other bins as well. Not everybody has a brown bin, not everybody uses their brown bin, and even when they have a brown bin, sometimes food waste ends up in the other bins as well. I think from a business point of view, there is a bit more, that's what we're looking at. We're getting them to look at their bin data. Because in general, as Colum referred to there, if you're in doing a week-long survey, they kind of, well, that week was a bit, you know, we had this big wedding and we were doing this, and, you know, it's not our normal practice. But when you plug in your annual bin weight, you can't argue with that. And, you know, until the idea being that if you look at it and say, I don't agree with that, well, find better data, put in the data that you do agree with. So it just starts people to look at it a bit more. But yeah, the national statistics do come from waste management companies, and they will also, you know, through studies. So a bit like the work that Jennifer has done, that gives us a bit more information. You know, our 1 million tons didn't include waste information from the primary production sector, the agriculture sector, because we don't actually have any indication of, we didn't have any indication of what was being wasted there. They wouldn't traditionally have you know, they wouldn't report to the EPA, maybe. They wouldn't necessarily use waste contractors either. A lot of stuff might get ploughed back into the soil, or they'd have alternative routes for it. So that study is particularly important to begin to give us data there. And similarly, then we have other studies like one that Colum and CTC did in kind of the food services sector to get that more information. But from a national point of view, it is from the waste management companies primarily. Yeah. Well, to add to your data, anecdotally, may I tell you that I took a punt on running a cookery class on Sunday for our guests, and I called it a sustainable kitchen, using ingredients and shopping carefully and using what you'd have in your store cupboard or your freezer, and making sure you had no waste as you went through the week. And I thought, well, I'd be lucky if that sells. And it actually booked out more than other classes with a waiting list. So perhaps the public are becoming increasingly interested in it. So I thought that was really good news and very encouraging. I think if I could just say, you know, some of the insight studies that we have done, there's very, very strong, you know, people who are aware of food waste are more likely to adopt behaviours to reduce it. And also there was a very strong showing in our data that a lot of people wanted to reduce their food waste, but they didn't know how. So I think absolutely those types of, and there are these kind of traditional skills maybe that we maybe don't use as much. How do you turn leftovers into a meal? Not, you know, a lot of people maybe don't learn those types of things anymore. So absolutely, that's great to hear. Yeah, thank you, Odile. Thank you very much for that. So my next question, it's aimed at Sushanta. And now here's a tricky one for you. What are our hard challenges in preventing food waste?
All right. Yeah, my experience is only very recent in this field. Of course, I think Colum has mentioned that tackling the food waste, there are different ways we can deal with. And especially the hard challenges that is relevant to our project. I mean, the WABA project. From that point of view, the hard challenges for tackling the food waste is say that the technology that we think is going to work based on our demonstration is actually designed for a small scale. It can work in a farm scale, it can work at a community scale, and also at a larger scale. So the challenge here is it is a new type of say slightly new way of tackling the food waste. So are the people going to be receptive with this new solution? So I think there is a proper education and proper training program to be added there to convince and also to deploy the system. I think that's what we see right now is a hard challenge. And once we are really able to solve or convince this challenge that the people are accepting, I think that we really achieved to provide the solution for that food waste that is generated at different scale. As we are talking, for example, the restaurant wastes and all. Yes, we have a solution for that, but ultimately it is a business model. It is the people who are the users. Can we convince them, and will they accept? So that is a hard challenge from our project point of view. That's what I can explain as a challenge.
And you're looking at it, Sushanta, mostly from the inevitable food waste.
Say it again.
You're looking at it mostly from the inevitable
food waste, yes. And in fact, right now, whatever we have demonstrated, that it can take any type of food waste coming from your kitchen waste or coming from the restaurant waste. It can be a mixed type of fruits, vegetables. It can be meat, cooked, uncooked. It can take up everything. So it is working. It is working at a different scale. But as we know, as of now, is the compost is the only process that is run by management companies. For example, we segregate our bins and providing those into the management companies, and they do the composting. But as I mentioned earlier, that process is still not complete because we are not able to capture the greenhouse gases. So that is why our solution. But again, the challenge is the same. Like, can we convince them? People are going to be receptive to a new thing, and they will. I think we are working towards that.
Thank you for that, Sushanta. And Sinead, what are the hard challenges, in your opinion, because I know you've done a lot of research on this, towards a sustainable and circular food system?
I suppose it's the behavior change piece and getting people to change long established habits. And Odile has alluded to some of this in her previous question as well. And in that respect, there's carrot or stick policies that we can take. So you can either just encourage the positive behavior, or you can enforce that particular behavior as well. Ideally, I would be in favor of the positive carrot to begin with, because I think you'll get more response in that regard. But as well, it's across every actor has a role to play. I think I see your next RTE show, Catherine, coming up as that sustainable kitchen show, and not just cooking the food, but showing what to do with the food waste, saying it's all right to have the leftovers. It's a good idea to have the leftovers because this is what you can turn it into tomorrow. And encouraging that use of leftovers, and not just showing kind of the nice part of the cooking program. One of the other aspects that occurred to me when Colum was making his comments earlier on was perhaps have more personalized servings in the restaurant industry. So if you think a man has a much higher calorie requirement than a woman, and yet they're both getting served the same size plate in a restaurant if they were to order the same dish. So maybe we need to look at personalizing even our menus in the restaurant setting, that you can, if today you're not especially hungry, you can say, well, can I have a small portion of that? And I know in some restaurants they'll give you starter portions, but maybe we need to look to man size and girl size or woman size portions as well, the same way you might look to doing kind of children's size portions. But I think having role models, positive role models in place is really important, and the role of the influencer in talking about food waste, how to prevent it. And I think there probably isn't anybody in this discussion group who isn't guilty of food waste. And I thought it was a bit ironic, as I was walking out the door this morning, there was 3 unhappy looking cooking apples that were bought 2 weeks ago to make a crumble and still hasn't been turned into a crumble yet. And I was just kind of looking at the irony of it, sitting in the kitchen thinking I should have done that sooner. So there is there's a lot of planning that needs to be put in place. So I think there's strategies, certainly from the consumer perspective, to try and put better planning in place, try and encourage positive behaviours, and put a positive focus on it, and get more influencers out there talking about how to use up surplus food in their kitchen, and even thinking about possibly the kitchens of the future, and how can we better store some of our food. So in some of the research we did recently, it was having the storage facilities, and knowing how to store food properly was one of the barriers to reducing food waste. So if future kitchens can keep that lettuce from wilting literally overnight, sometimes you come home with the head of lettuce and you go to use it the next day and it's gone completely limp maybe. So it's to try and see what food technologies we can look to as well, to try and prevent food waste. And I know there's certainly a lot of packaging technologies being introduced now as well that can help keep our food fresher for longer. And also then, looking into the best before versus the sell by or use by dates are certainly a big issue when it comes to food waste. And sometimes maybe we just need to trust our nose. If it smells all right, it's probably still okay to eat. That's not a strategy I'm necessarily promoting, but there's some of those innate skills that we possibly need to look back to and not forget as well.
And whilst I'm not a mad fan of packaging, Sinead, because that creates a different problem, but perhaps the foods that do have to have packaging should have instructions on it on how to keep that food fresher for longer.
Yeah.
For example, you buy the baby gem lettuce that comes in a pear in a bag. But when you open it, should there not be instructions on that pack as to how to store it, or to cover it with the damp cloth and it'll keep fresher for longer, and things like that I think would really help. So it's, to make it circular, we're going right back to the producer and bringing it into the kitchen with the information.
Yeah.
And do you know something as well? Over the years when we talk about food waste, and I'd be interested just in your research on this, we have a figure. We say it's about €700 a year that each home wastes on food. Have you found during your research that had any impact, that information that people went, oh, €700, that's a weekend away? Or were they just, it's more convenient just to buy 3 peppers together rather than one? So
I think there's some positives from it. If you think, oh, €700, what I could buy with that if I didn't waste my food. I suppose it's idealistic. You'll still go out and do the same behavior. So it's changing the behavior. The financial reward isn't enough to make us change our behavior. So it's to look to other ways to change that behavior. And it's even a bit like when every year in the budget, when money would go on cigarettes or go on beer, it didn't necessarily result in reducing the prevalence of smoking. People still spent the extra money on it. So I think it's a bit like, or if I gave up smoking, I'd be so much richer because I'm not spending whatever amount of money a week, and it isn't enough to make people stop smoking. So I think while it's good from an awareness perspective that not only are you throwing out all of the resources that went into producing this food, but you're also throwing out the third of what you spent this week on your shopping. And Jennifer was talking earlier about all of the different actors in the supply chain. And I think if we had if we were more informed in terms of the investment that goes into those 3 sad looking cooking apples I was looking at this morning, in terms of the farmer growing them, producing them, whatever was used for crop protection, to transporting it to the shop, to you bringing it home, the carbon cost of all of that, and then it's just going into the bin. And that can't, now with a bit of luck, it'll go into our composting bin and end up in the garden next summer. But that can't be recouped. That in total costs, either the money I spent on it or the cost of producing it. And so that it's not just the physical piece of food that you're wasting. And I think a campaign around the entire waste spectrum of that piece of food could possibly be useful. But it needs to be done in a positive way. It's not this kind of guilt that you need to go around with every day of, oh God, I won't sleep tonight for that piece of food rotting in the kitchen downstairs. And we need to try and the positive side would be more important to focus on. think I've lost Catherine. Should I keep talking and fill in the space, or?
I think Colum had something. He had his hand up there. So maybe Colum, you want to address something while Catherine comes back?
Yeah, excuse me. It was just in relation to something that Sinead said there, just with regards to communications and the appropriate measures. You know, it is one of the things that we found from a food service perspective. You know, this is not an investment in technology. It's not an investment in you know, change. Well, it is an investment in change behaviors between staff members and customers, and that communication aspect. You know, we have this thing in Ireland where we don't want to be seen to be giving out small portions. I think it's a historical residue, and yet when we get this personalized service, we very much enjoy it, and we've done a number of case studies with businesses that have simply changed the communication and noticed decreases in food waste volumes coming back from plates. So yeah, communication is essential in the food service industry, you know, and yet understanding that a lot of the times waiting staff are very, very busy and might be dealing with a chef who'll throw a knife at them. But you know, it's crucial really if we want to have this personalized level of food, which will automatically reduce food waste numbers. That's just a fact.
Thank you so much for that, Colum, and apologies for disappearing there. Wi-Fi. Courtney, what, in your opinion, is the low-hanging fruit here for us?
So when I think of low-hanging fruit, I think of the easy, actionable steps that we can take with little to no resources, and that can have a big impact on our food waste. So I think at individual level, which is where we're most empowered, we have huge opportunity to make slight tweaks to our food consumption behaviors, from meal planning to making shopping lists. That can have a huge impact on our waste. They're all listed for you on Stop Food Waste, and they're really simple changes that have a huge impact. And if all else fails and your household is still generating waste, there's the opportunity to utilize community projects like the Odile app or FoodShare Kerry's community fridge, which provide free and accessible community-owned circular food sharing outlets for each individual in the community. At retail level, there's huge opportunities to become really creative in the promotion and marketing. For example, in 2010, Tesco trialed a new food promotion, buy one now, get one free later, and it applied mostly to fresh fruit and veg. So this allowed customers to still benefit from the promotion, the organization to still generate profits, but strategically prevented the overconsumption and the inevitable food waste that normally goes hand in hand with those promotions. And I know it's been mentioned before, but food waste measurement is super important. We did, FoodShare Kerry did a really informal mapping of food waste resources available to businesses. And we found that from the EPA, Stop Food Waste, to Save Our Food, and a dozen others, there's an abundance of guidelines, checklists, resources available to food businesses. But a gap exists between accessing this information, the actual implementation of it. And I believe that gap is motivation. So considering from 2022, with EU waste laws, we're required to report our food waste levels, it might be a really good opportunity to make it a legal requirement for food businesses to also report their food waste levels. It can might be the catalyst and has the potential for them to really look at their waste and implement the resources that are available to them. I think there are 1,000,001 ways, and loads of them have been mentioned already, from simplifying food labels to reducing cosmetic standards. And I suppose that's kind of the beauty and the madness of food waste, that throughout the whole supply chain, there exists huge actionable steps that have a big impact and just take a little bit of will and creativity. And if you paired that with a conducive policy environment, financial incentives and entrepreneurship, Ireland could well be on its way to its 2030 goals.
Very good, Courtney. Very interesting. What was the name of that app again?
Olio.
Olio, okay.
Yeah,
O-L-I-O,
I think.
Okay, I should look that one up. You learn something every day is a learning day, isn't it? And now we have some questions in. Dermot Callahan has asked, how do we capture waste volume from primary producer, wholesaler, retailers? That's a broad one. Would that be for Colum? Would that be a question for you?
I could probably do the latter too. I think Jennifer would probably be best placed to talk about the primary producers. So it's ladies first.
Sure. Yeah, so at least what we did for our study in primary producers was, and ours was kind of a short 1-year study. So just to get an initial figure to figure out what was going on, but there's still more work to do in terms of measuring it. But what we did was we interviewed farmers, so a number of different farmers from or growers or fishers from different sectors, different types of produce. And so we, for example, would have interviewed a number of potato growers and figured out what issues they have. On average, for example, do they lose 5% of their potatoes to this pest or disease, or to this problem in the supply chain, or storage issues, or so on and so forth. And then we would have added all of those up, and we've done that for every single food that is grown to some to a decent extent, at least in Ireland. But yes, of course, there's other things you can do. You could do that data, you know, that could be a requirement for all farmers, so you can get more accurate data. And you could also have some farm visits from, you know, regulatory people who would go and kind of verify that data and make sure that what's being reported is correct as well. If that would be, you know, that's a very big thing to do, I suppose, as well, but not something you could do very easily. Thanks.
I'll just come in there. So on the sort of the retailer wholesaler, I think that's what Dermot asked. There's a pretty well-established methodology for characterizing waste in the commercial sectors, because commercial businesses tend to be relatively homogenous in the waste they generate. What we do is we go and we spend a couple of days basically assessing the waste of 5, 6, 7, 8 businesses. We take all the samples and then we combine them into a waste profile for that particular sector. So we know that the waste profile is that, which, so you'd know how much waste, how much brown bin waste, how much black bin waste or general waste is generated, and then the contents within each of the bins. So what level of contamination might be in the brown bin, what level of food waste and recyclables would be in the general waste bin. And then those profiles are applied to national data, which the EPA collects through the waste collectors. So that's how you get the figures that Odile mentioned earlier on that contribute to our estimation of 1 million tonnes. Householders and commercial businesses are relatively straightforward. As soon as you start getting into food and drink manufacturing and production sites, it becomes much more challenging. And as Jennifer mentioned, then you're into primary producers. So I hope that kind of give you an idea of how it's carried out.
So, Katrina Power here. We have lost our moderator. And so we have 2 minutes left in the session. And so Jenny, would you like to share a slide, or would perhaps give an opportunity to the panelists to talk about programs that are available?
There we go. Can you see that now? Sorry, this was a slide, I suppose, that was shared in the promotion of the event as well. So there's, this is the lineup for the event, and there's everyone's names there. So we'll share this with all of the participants now after the event. And this will include also the contact details for all of the panelists. So if you want to get in touch with anyone, if you have any questions about any of the initiatives that we would have spoken about, feel free to do so. And also there'll be, so there's some list of projects written under here as well, and there'll be links to all of those. So all of these, if you click on them in the PDF, it'll take you straight to the website for that initiative. So you'll be able to look up some more information there as well. I don't know if there's any of the panelists who maybe want to talk through anything that wasn't discussed here. Yeah, Odile.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, give a plug. We every 2 years we run a forum on food waste, which is aimed at the food manufacturing and production sector primarily, and then the retail supply chain, and that's taking place online on the 4th of November. And if anybody is interested in attending or having a look at the agenda, if they visit epafoodwasteforum.com, I'll send you the link so we can circulate it.
Thanks, Odile. And Sinead?
Just to come back to one of the questions that came in about using primary schools to change behaviour and norm. And I think it is a fantastic opportunity, because it's certainly, that's where a lot of behaviours start. and there's a lot of pester power with kids. So if they're seeing food waste as being something bad, they bring that home with them and they complain about it when they see it happening in the kitchen as well. It's been shown to be really good in terms of safety belt use and mobile phone use while driving. And there's no reason to believe that it wouldn't be a really good opportunity as well, just to answer the question that came in earlier on.
Thanks, Sinead. Yeah, I completely agree. I remember like back home, we started recycling because I had a talk at school about recycling. So I went home and I was like, wait, this is really important. And then we started from there, you know, and that's how it goes. And I think education, and specifically, you know, starting off when people are very, very young, and, you know, so that they can grow up with that idea and start to incorporate it. I think it's a lot easier to change the behavior of someone who's growing up and to teach them something, because that's when they're learning everything that they're learning mostly, as opposed to trying to change someone who is already set in their habits.
Well, I'm back, everybody. I've been kicked out twice. I don't know what's going on, so I apologize. But thank you all very much to our amazing panelists. It's been so insightful. It's been incredibly interesting. I think as we started out, we mentioned how far-reaching food waste is. And I think from today, we can see that it's not just something social, it's not just environmental, but it's also a highly scientific matter. And I think all of this combined will lead us towards a more circular and sustainable food system in Ireland. And I'd particularly like to thank the Circular Bioeconomy Cluster Southwest, ShannonABC and the CircBio Research Group for organising today, and for our amazing panellists who've been incredible in the volume of information and everything that we've all learned. And you can see on the screen there's plenty of contacts for you to follow up and websites to check out. And thank you everybody for tuning in today, and I hope we've somehow inspired you. Thanks a million.